Okay, thank you, everybody. So definitely thank you for participating, and thank you for folks for allowing a little break in between the presentations to give the other individuals who came from the first presentation some time to recalibrate. On that, we are going to go, if we can go to the next slide, the two presentations that we're going to we'll cover today is the policy and program support that is within the hazardous waste management program. And then that's going to be in the next, we're going to cover that in the next 15, 20 minutes with Q&A. And then afterwards, we're going to go into the permitting division, which is going to take us to the end of the presentation. There was a couple questions again that weren't answered, and we are going to be hoping to be able to actually get an opportunity to get those questions answered during these presentations. So with that, I'll pass it on to Rizgar Ghazi, who is the Deputy Director for the Hazardous Waste Management Program and is going to provide our next presentation. So go ahead, Rizgar.
Thank you, Deanna, and welcome back, everybody. My next slide is about PPSP, the Policy Program and branch. This branch provides, their mission is to provide our stakeholders with regulatory tools and information needed to safely manage hazardous waste in California. I kind of put this slide up there with a picture just to show you that we all generate hazardous waste. In fact, in California, we generate about 4.5 billion pounds of hazardous waste. We all generate hazardous waste, and we're responsible for proper management of hazardous waste. And this branch, Policy and Program Support Branch, provides the help that for our generators, for our inspectors, for a variety of folks that need help, how to properly manage our hazardous waste. Next slide, please. So the Policy and Program Support Branch under DTSC's Hazardous Waste Management Program is charged with developing, interpreting hazardous waste management statutes and regulations. This work provides the regulatory and policy foundation so that our hazardous waste are managed legally and safely in California. PPSB also coordinates with local and federal agencies, the regular community, and other interested stakeholders on site-specific application of applicable hazardous waste management requirements. This branch also also manages the RCRA grant for us. So US EPA delegated the primary responsibility for implementing the RCRA, or Resource Conservation Recovery Act program, to the department. DTSC is responsible for obtaining and maintaining authorization from US EPA to administer the RCRA program. PPSB manages the authorization and a process by ensuring the state hazardous waste program is at least equivalent to the RCRA program. PPSB also develops, implements, interprets hazardous waste management regulations designed to manage products that become hazardous waste at the end of life of the product. That becomes hazardous waste or non-traditional waste streams. 2018/19, PPSB operated with a budget of $4.5 million with approximately 32.5 positions. Those numbers fluctuated over time. In fact, currently, at that time when we did this analysis, we did analysis with 27.5 positions. There's only the positions that were funded within that program. PPSB is supported by the Hazardous Waste Control Account, and this is the source of funding that comes in for that program. Next slide, please. So PPSB is comprised of 3 different units. They provide, again, an in-depth policy and regulatory guidance to the public, industry, government agencies, including the CUPAs, who also develop and interpret hazardous waste management statutes and regulations, and so that our staff and our regulatory entities could use. So the 3 units, we have 3 units there. I won't go in detail what they are, but the Regulatory Assistant Office, this office basically handles all calls. And I'll go over the stats later on. They approximately manage over 6,000 calls on a yearly basis and provide written responses to a variety of questions that comes to their office. We also have a Policy and Development Unit, and this unit is manages the RCRA authorization for the program. And again, DTSC being an authorized state, we need to comply with the requirements of that authorization. There is the 3rd unit, it's a Program Implementation Unit. And this unit develop and manage several unique regulatory programs that address the specific circumstances associated with non-traditional hazardous waste. A good example, the PV modules. So we created rulemaking and got authorization from US EPA to manage that waste as e-waste versus hazardous waste. Moving on to the next slide, please. Again, I had talked to you about the policy and program support branch. They manage over 6,000 regulatory inquiries. They manage 25 case-specific interpretive letters that comes to the Department for Interpretation. They develop over 700 written responses to partner agencies and the public. We conduct over 75 field evaluation of site-specific applications and this program also manages our worker program of $10 million that we have. And of course, they manage a work plan that we had to submit on a 3-year cycle to US EPA. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight, again, I mentioned that we keep track of our hours, and judiciously we keep track of how our staff manages their hours. And one of the things that we did, we identified the problem area, how we provide support and our interaction with our partner Coupas. And so we took on this project, a Lean Six Sigma project that looked at effective way we need to provide support to our 81 Coupas. The problem statement we had is that our regulatory assistance unit were being inundated with multiple requests for technical support from various staff at the 81 Coupas. As you recall, I had mentioned there are approximately 900 inspectors within the 81 Coupas, and typically those questions are funneled through their management structure. But since we did not have a structure, this Lean Six Sigma project laid out a process for questions through the Coupas are funneled through a process and verification prior to coming to the department or to PPSB. That system alone streamlined the process and decreased number of hours spent communicating back and forth with the Coupas. And then it is with if you see in the slide, it is additional savings to the department because now we are able to redirect our resources to more essential work. Again, this project had a goal of being responsive to the Coupas for 95% of the time within 30 days. Again, I'm very proud of this project, and it has been successfully working. Of course, with any projects, we always look back and figure out whether the processes we put in place have worked. We did identify areas that we still need some streamlining, and I'm hoping in the future that we could go back and iron out the additional changes that we need to bring in. Next slide, please. So this is an example where DTSC is a leader, and this is an example where we did rulemaking to manage, to create rulemaking to manage for the management of PV modules or solar panels, and getting authorization from US EPA. DTSC was the first in the nation to get such authorization from US EPA. I won't go into the details of the rulemaking and what it does, but it's a great story where DTSC took the leadership and came up with rules making for management of the PV modules. Next slide, please. DTSC, as being an authorized state, were required to implement their record subtablet C requirements. And that includes, that means that we need to enforce, to get authorization for rules that US EPA adopts, and we need to adopt those rules and to get authorization from US EPA. So it's a two-step process where US EPA comes up with the rules, and DTSC needs to examine that rule, whether those rules are similar or more stringent than ours or less stringent than ours. If it's less than more stringent than ours, we need to adopt a new rule. And again, the PV module is a good example. We adopted the rule. And again, with that, the second step would be is to get authorization from US EPA. However, that said, we have two staff in that office, and this we used to be called the RCRA unit, and there are two staff. There are a number of rules that DTSC has fallen behind, and there are approximately 12 what's called 12 core rules that we need to adopt. And there are approximately 15 non-core rules that we need to adopt as well. There are several other rules that we evaluate and we're not adopting. However, these are the core rules and non-core rules DTSC has to adopt through rulemaking and receiving authorization from your CPA. Next step. Why is that important that we need to adopt? Again, as an authorized state, we need to maintain our authorization. And the failure to receive the authorization, we could lose our grant funding from USCPA. We also could lose our authority to enforce our hazardous waste laws, the RCRA hazardous waste laws, and our ability to issue RCRA permits. These hazardous waste facilities will also be jeopardized. Our analysis indicate again, we're required to adopt these rules, some of these number of the rules by September 2022. And we did an analysis that we need 11 additional positions to be able to quickly adopt the 12 core author rules and in the following year adopt additional rules. These are the 15 rules. So we're looking at approximately 27 rules we need to adopt, and the positions we estimate it requires 11 positions. This is not only rulemaker planners or rulemaker writers. This includes legal staff and administrative staff to support that program. Next slide, please. So we also identified, in the 80s, this is pollution prevention. So DTSC at one time in the 80s had two laws that were enacted that required DTSC to implement the pollution prevention or P2 program. P2 was charged with providing technical and research assistance to generators to come up with methods to reducing the generation of hazardous waste. The statute also mandated large quantity of generators to examine examine opportunities to reduce waste generated at the source. The statute, however, did not require that large generators implement these strategies for reducing hazardous waste. The P2 program, in 2008, we ended the P2 program. Those resources were moved to the new program, which is a Safer Consumer Products, and these resources are working toward that program now. So this program has not been resourced since 2008. So in recent last 2 years, our stakeholders have expressed strong desire, interest in reestablishing DTSC's P2 program, or another program that reduces hazardous waste at the source of generation. Why is that important? So as you know, we only have two hazardous waste landfills in California, and these hazardous waste landfills are located in environmental justice communities, which by not reducing the hazardous generation of hazardous waste, these landfills will be utilized to dispose of the waste and provide impacting our communities even further. The updated P2 program could assist our generators in reducing waste being generated and to be shipped and not to be shipped off-site to the hazardous waste landfills. Based on our experience, PPSB would require approximately 23 positions to establish and update the P2 program. Again, the P2 program would consist of two specialized units, and the first unit would work on identifying emerging waste management technologies, and the second unit would recreate the waste classification unit. The workload analysis had additional potential outcomes for this program, and this is where we would like to engage you on the scope of this program and how it should be sized. Again, this is we got a lot of feedback during the DTSC overview by the agency, and stakeholders directly came to the department requesting that we initiate this P2 program. We'd love to engage you folks on how we could bring this program back and how we could be beneficial to California in reducing our hazardous waste generation. Next slide. Next slide again. Okay, so the takeaways. Our takeaways have expressed strong, again, What are the takeaways? Again, I talked about the P2 program and the desire to implement that program, requiring additional resources. That's an area that we'd like to get your feedback on. However, the RCRA authorization activities and to continue the authorized state, we're requesting additional resources of 11 positions to continue the RCRA program, RCRA authorization program that supports us in our enforcement actions, in our permitting programs, and managing the RCRA activities. With that, I'm going to move on to the next slide, and this is the question and answers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rizgar. So same format as before. If you have a question, please go ahead and put yourself in the queue. And then I have a couple questions already in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask those. And the first question that we received from the chat was from Angela Johnson. And she basically wants to know, how do you foresee public engagement being handled as you push to adopt this large number of rules? So either Rizgar or Francesca.
Thank you. I can answer that question. Mm-hmm. So rulemaking, again, the process for rulemaking is established in regulations. And typically what the department, when it engages in new rules, and Angela, so you and I have talked about we had in the last few years, we came up with the VSP regulations. Typically for those new rules, we engage the community and to get feedback. And this is what's called the activities that's done pre-rulemaking. And this is where we held workshops and to get feedback from the community and interested groups, what their rules should look like. Once we develop that pre-APA language and the text for that rule, we go out and start the rulemaking. And the rulemaking process takes about a year we have to complete that rulemaking within a year to come up with the regulations. Again, once we go through the rulemaking, OIL basically adopts it, and we have regulations. That is the process for rulemaking. However, since we're a RCRA state authorized state, we're in addition to that, in parallel process, when the rulemaking starts, we have to prepare an authorization package, and that is a demonstration to the USCPA why this particular rule making is equivalent to what USCPA has for their rules, and either just as stringent or more stringent than what USCPA has. So it's a two-step process for the RCRA authorization.
Okay, and then we have somebody in the queue, and that will be Ingrid Bostrom. So go ahead, Ingrid. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm interested in the pollution prevention program, but also if there's been any consideration of performance standards. I mean, that's something I've been looking at through all the different, work plans or workload analysis is, what is going to be guiding the decisions and the amount of resources needed. So I am wondering specifically for the P2 piece, what performance standards would be in place there, and certainly want to make the link between the P2 program and the need for a hazardous waste reduction goal. I know DTSC has in the past committed 50% reduction of hazardous waste disposal or generated in the state, and whether the hazardous waste management plan has been considered as a possible way to figure out some performance standards for the need for prevention in the state.
Hi, Ingrid, and thank you for your question. I think it's going to be a two-part question. I'm going to respond to the first part on the P2, and then I'm going to let Francesca chime in regarding the hazardous waste management plan. So for the P2, again, this is it would be a new program, and we know from the previous experience with the previous P2 program, it was, I don't want to call it a failure. However, there was no requirement on the generators of the hazardous waste, did not commit the generators to reducing their hazardous waste. So definitely when we engage in discussion with the regulated community and with the public, is definitely we want to know what are the expectations, what, again, as previous comments we received, what outcomes do you want out of this one, and what kind of performance standards? That's something that we're open to discussion. Again, I definitely want to have standards and requirements that we lay out for the generators to have commitment, and those commitments are and they're held accountable to meet those commitments. So that's, at least in my view, that's one of the first things I need to know. What is the outcomes? What responsibility would the generator community required to have on them? And of course, with any programs, definitely with such a, I'm talking about priming program, what accountability is there for the department as well?
Yeah, great question, Ingrid. Thanks so much. And just to echo what Rizgar said, I think when we talk about the hazardous waste management plan and the reinvention of a P2 program, we want to talk about it in terms of working with you all to modernize it, to have trackable metrics that we can hold the department and our partners accountable and measure our progress and success. I think that's crucially important. An important element that perhaps didn't exist when the statutes were created, but as we're contemplating the reinvention of these two programs, definitely we would want to see performance metrics included.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And then with that, I have another question through the chat really quickly, and given that we're getting close to this presentation's time allotment. The question is, how long would it take to approve and hire additional positions for the RCRA, to adopt RCRA by 2022, as indicated in one of the slides?
Sure, I could answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it's a good question. So it's the mechanics of getting these positions. Again, DTSC cannot engage in hiring process till we get the authorization to hire the other positions. And that is a budget process, and I'm going to leave that alone. However, once we do get the green light to be able to hire, our programs are set up. We work closely with our HR to, again, it's a process. We work with HR, and again, depending on the type of hires we're looking for, we do what I call pre-hiring process. Make sure we have our duty statements, our hiring package is ready. Once you get the green light, we can go out there and advertise and conduct outreach effort through universities and through different channels. LinkedIn, we try to recruit the best qualified people in the process. Now, we do this regularly anyway. So the question is, when can we bring those boots in the office or virtual office now? Again, that's a process. We can do some legwork in advance. Once we get the green light, we could start the interview process and the hiring process at that time.
Yeah, and then just to follow up on that, is there a timing in regards to thinking about hiring or looking for those additional positions this fiscal year or for next fiscal year, Rizgar or Francesca?
Just to be clear, we aren't budgeted for these positions at this point. The workload analysis was designed to identify gaps in resources, and this is an area where we have a gap in resources in order to deliver this. So it is a statutorily required activity. And so, we're looking internally to see what we can do to continue to make progress. One of the things I think that are key takeaways from the workload analyses is over time we've redirected from one activity to the next activity in kind of a whack-a-mole fashion to deal with whatever was in front of us at any given time, and that's eroded in our service levels. That's eroded our service levels in some key areas, and this is an example of a program that's had that occur. And so right now we don't have the resources. A fee structure that went into place as an example on July 1st, would result in fees coming in the subsequent fiscal year for these types of activities. So just to give you an idea of what that timeline would be.
So given that's 4:34 and just being mindful that we still have another presentation that's going to probably take about 20 minutes to just present and then about 10 minutes to 15 for Q&A. So we're just going to transition to the second presentation. And then from there, then we can go ahead and do a Q&A there. And with that, Rizgar, do you want to do the permitting division?
Right, thank you. Could you move on to the next slide, please? I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about these 4 programs, and I'm really excited to go over these. And again, we didn't provide you adequate time to answer questions. And definitely we can make myself available and my team members available to answer any questions in the future. And I'd love to engage with you guys and to hear your feedback. So this is the last presentation as the permitting division. I have this slide here just to show you the realm of what California is about. There are 40 million Californians, and our goal is to make sure, and PRIMA program is we manage our hazardous waste in California in a protective that the people of California, and to manage that waste that protects our environment. Let's move on to the next slide. So our mission is to protect Californians and the environment from toxic harm by making timely, enforceable, and protective permit decisions for the operation of hazardous waste facilities in accordance with all applicable laws and sound science. Some key data is here. There are 59% of our hazardous waste. I'm sorry, can you move back to the previous slide? I think we moved to, yeah, let's keep it on this slide for now. This is, again, I love this picture because it shows what Californians love to do, be in the beaches and be outdoors. So our hazardous waste facilities, there are approximately 59% of these hazardous waste facilities are within 1/2 mile of our communities, specifically with our environmental justice communities. I had mentioned in the previous slide that we Californians generate over 4.5 billion pounds of hazardous waste. And that waste needs to be managed from individual persons to large corporations. And our job at DTSC, the PRIMA program, makes sure that management of hazardous waste is done correctly. Next slide, please. So this is the makeup of our permitting division. There are approximately 72 positions and within 9 organizational units. I apologize, not 72 positions. There are 65.5 positions in the organizational units. There's a difference in the 2 slides that I have in front of me because we just recently did a reorg within the hazardous waste management program where permitting acquired a new unit. And I could talk about that later. But right now, for the purpose of this slide presentation, we have 65.5 positions. Majority of the staff are engineers and scientists. And we have approximately 21% of our staff and administrative support. And this is where we provide our financial assurance experts, our AGPAs that ensure that our EnviroStore is up and running, and our staff are kept appraised of their trainings and requirements. Our office also specializes, has 2 specialized units, the SECO unit and the financial assurance unit. These 2 units play a critical role in the success of the program. Next slide, please. So this is another way of looking at the program. The permitting organization, there are approximately 6 units, not approximately, there are 6 units that process permits and make permit decisions. There's the financial responsibility unit and the SECO unit. If you add all those up, there's 8 units, and I said 7 or 9 earlier. There's another unit that came on that we moved within the program to the permitting program for better integration of the work that we're doing. Again, the permitting program has an operating budget of $13 million, and with the staff located in the Berkeley, Sacramento, and Chatsworth office. Next slide, please. This slide shows you how we spend our hours. We track our staff hours through our daily logs timekeeping system, and we keep. And again, we have staff. This is where administrative staff that could run reports for us. And this analysis shows that majority of our time is spent in making permit decisions, permit decision, SUCA determination, and financial responsibility activities. At DTSC also, we do coordination, 50% of our hours, and this is consultation, outreach work that we do that, and including rulemaking, doing public participation and other activities that are not core to the permitting process. 19% of our hours are devoted to administrative activities. In addition to these activities, the permitting program isn't taken a rulemaking where we developed the VSP rulemaking within the permit program, and now we are developing additional rulemaking to complete the SPC and the three permitting criteria rules. And this is the criteria we're developing when we make permit decisions that considers cumulative impacts and vulnerable communities. And that's a key element within the permit program, and it's important rulemaking that the permitting program and the department taken on. Next slide, please. Again, the bulk of our time in permitting is spent reviewing applications and operating plans for compliance with standards and requirements. In 2018-19 fiscal year, permitting issued 18 permits decisions for renewals and permit modifications, and oversaw over 12 closure activities facilities. Again, we spent approximately 17% of our time developing training, community outreach activities, and operation and maintenance activities. This slide represents the 6 permitting units within the permitting division. Next slide. We have a financial responsibility unit. This unit is responsible for reviewing all financial mechanisms for hazardous waste facilities, including financial mechanisms for our projects under the cleanup program. The financial responsibility unit works closely with our permitting cost estimators and engineers from engineering and special projects office to ensure facilities financial assurance mechanisms are in line with our cost estimates that are prepared by our engineers within DTSC. The financial responsibility unit reviews and monitors approximately $2.5 billion worth of mechanisms. Violations for lack of fully funded mechanism are considered a Class 1 violation. The FR unit coordinates closely with our enforcement group to take enforcement actions if necessary to bring the facilities into compliance. Next slide, please. We also manage a SECO unit. This is a small unit, consists of 3 staff and a supervisor. They play a critical role in supporting the permit program to prepare and support us with the CEQA reviews and CEQA preparation documents. In FY 18-19, the CEQA unit processed approximately 1,393 requests. I'll discuss with those requests. We also managed within those requests. We also managed work that's being done for the permitting program. And the type of work that these 1,300 entail preparation of the notice of exemptions, environmental data analysis, and addendas, and also prepare comments on key CEQA documents for the program. Next slide. So I'm very excited with this slide. I think one of the comments we got, where are your outputs? And this is a slide deck, or excuse me, a chart that the permitting program uses to monitor and tracks all deliverables for the program. What you're looking at is an electronic dashboard, and the permitting program developed. The uniqueness of this dashboard that you can drill down to the specific projects and track specific projects and tasks and milestones. So just an example, if I'm interested in knowing, we produce, come up with a work plan to process a number of permits. And this dashboard, you can figure out whether that particular permit is on time, was it completed on time, or was it delayed? And you can drill down to the days that that particular project was not completed. So this is a live dashboard that gets updated, and it's used by the supervisors, managers, and the division chief to keep track of the project. And again, the key KPIs or key performance indicators from the permit program will be used at the department's dashboard, and that we're hoping to come out next couple of months to showcase. This is it's a great dashboard that really I could be from home and want to know where are you with the permit for X facility, and I can drill down and find out what is the status, whether that, and if I need to know the project manager, I can find that from that slide, that dashboard. It's a great way of tracking projects and again, this is developed where you can drill down to the unit level, to the staff level, or at the project level. Next slide, please. So the premium program in the previous years had received resources to strengthen its programs. And we have been able to increase our service levels to demonstrate what we can do with a properly resourced program. We have implemented multiple process improvements in the permitting program that significantly reduced the time to make permit decisions. In 2013, our average for processing a permit was 4.5 years, and today we're bringing it down to 2.5 years. The permitting program developed a culture of continuous improvements. We have black belts and green belts within the organization, and now these black belts and potentially green belts could provide assistance to other programs within the department. We're very proud of this group, and they have a culture that once they complete a Lean Six Sigma project, they move on to the other opportunities to bring additional process improvements. So the goal for the permit program is to have an average of 16 permit decisions per year, with a goal of making 90% of these permits decisions in 2 years. Because of these improvements, we did not identify a great number of gaps within the program, except for 2 areas, and I'll talk to you about it in the next slides. And this is CEQA and the VSP. Again, what you see in front of you is the rate. We have key KPIs that we measure and track in the standings, whether we are able to deliver for the program. Next slide. I talked about this one already. So this is I talked about in 2013, we're able to produce permits in 4.5 years. And we had laid out a goal for permitting program to process permits, 90% of the permits within 2 years. And this is a graphic that shows the target where we're at. In 2018-19, we're at 65% of our permits are issued within 2.5 years, and 25% of the permits are issued within 2.7 years. We're moving forward to that goal of meeting 90% permits completed within 2 years. Next slide, please. So when we conducted our workload analysis, the permitting program identified a resource gap with implementing the VSP procedures. As you recall, so most of you are aware, the VSP scoring procedure is a huge policy area for the department, where under this process, the facility receives an annual inspection score as well as a facility score that aggregates 10 years of inspections. And this portion of the scoring is being done by our colleagues in the enforcement group, and they have a group of people, and they identified also a resource gap to implement that side of it. The permitting program uses these scores to make permit decisions. Again, the tenet of that particular law requires to bring in transparency and holds permit facilities accountable, and also holds DTSC programs accountable to implement the outcome of these scores. So again, permitting uses these scores to require permit modifications that increase the protection of the public health environment, including denying permits and conducting permit revocations. We had to redirect this work. For this work, we had to redirect staff from the permit program to process the VSP's outcomes, and additional resources were moved from actually the permits that were conducting, and it did slow down the permit program in meeting their goals, the 90% in 2 years. So again, this is a resource gap that we looked at and have identified that that's needed. Again, this is the description of what the number of resources the permit program is seeking to support the VSP program and implementing that program. We're looking at 2 additional positions for the permitting program and 1 legal support. And again, this slide does look at the number of attorneys needed to support the permitting program. As you see, also has this is the same slide for enforcement, where number of enforcement staff that required to support this program and the number of attorneys. So there are 2 attorneys that we need in addition to the permit writers and the enforcement staff. The legal staff are needed to support the programs in the challenges during the VSP appeals, and one of the permitting programs goes through revocation and denials, will need legal support to defend the Department of actions. Next slide, please. So CEQA, I mentioned CEQA does over 1,300, process over 1,300 documents a year. And again, the CEQA group does provide support to the permit program for the permit decision and the CEQA documentation necessary. In addition to that, we receive multiple CEQA reviews from other departments they approach us and request that we do CEQA reviews. And this is we use our expertise in our CEQA units to ensure that mitigation for potential harm, environmental harm, is in place when we review these documents for other agencies. So, so we really need these positions input into these. We need to spend more time in reviewing these documents. And the next slide, I'll please move on to the next slide. So this slide shows the resources needed. Right now, the rate we review documents, the necessary rate to review these external documents that comes in, it's about 1.5 hours. However, the number of resources we have available for that is 1 PY, and this person spends less than half hour on each document and does not give it a fair review. And this analysis indicated we need 2 additional positions just to have the ability to review a document and on an average of 1.5 hours. So we're seeking 2 additional positions for this CEQA unit at a minimum. Next slide. Again, this is a summation, a summary of the resource gaps that we looked at, and permitting program seeks 2 additional project managers for the VSP, 2 attorneys to support permitting and enforcement. But I apologize, but this slide does not have the 2 additional positions that we're seeking, or 4 additional positions that we're seeking for enforcement. That was in the previous slide. We're also seeking 2 additional positions for 2 additional planners to support the CEQA effort to ensure that we review external documents that comes into the department. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways from for the permit program, we need these additional resources. Let me step back. Permitting has been resourced in the past, and we have utilized these resources to tremendous lot of good work. And the permitting program has situated itself for success. There are 2 areas that we identified, and this is being the VSP, implementing the VSP program. And again, the CEQA program definitely needs additional resources to ensure that the documents that comes in are reviewed for environmental impacts throughout the state. With that, I'm going to move on to the next slide for questions and answers. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Rosgar. So with this, I have a couple questions on the queue, and then also if folks have ability, you can go ahead and raise your hand and I can call on you. And then on the questions regarding some of the, and this is something that came from the previous questions that we weren't able to answer specifically, this is on VSP implementation. And then there's a question specifically indicating that they remain concerned that the VSP implementation with the current scoring mechanism results in letting some of the worst polluters off the hook for their bad compliance history. What is your plan to update the VSP formula?
Thank you. Absolutely. Just the way background for our group, VSP, again, it's a new policy area for the department. The state of California, or DTSC, were the first in the nation to come up with a scoring process to come up with this transparent way of showing how the standing of these facilities. Again, it holds the department accountable, and it holds the facilities accountable for their compliance. And DTSC, in implementing this program, there's a lot of lessons learned. I want to be straightforward with you folks. The department has brought in great improvements how we do inspections There's a lot of, as I talked about, the Lean Six Sigma programs that we put in place, similar to permitting. We have our permits are stronger now. They have a lot of permit conditions, and there are enforceable permits. If you go back 10 years, these permits were not as enforceable, and our inspection reports were not as strong. So the violations that we identified did have some weaknesses to it. So to implement the VSP program, we put in a lot of changes to the program. Process improvements within ERD, how we document inspections, how do you document reports, and the intent to make sure these documents are used for purposes of enforcement and legal challenges. In addition, permitting could use those documents to improve the permit for those sites. There's a lot of lessons learned, and we're making those changes now within the programs. Rulemaking wise, that definitely there are changes. There's a lot. We get a lot of feedback from the industry. We get feedback from the stakeholders that the with scoring mechanism that we have laid out and needs improvements. So we are engaging some community members and others to how we could look at the scoring mechanism and whether there's a better system that we could have in place to really come up with a fair process way of evaluating these facilities. And that is we have Wayne Lorenzen, our acting division chief for permit program, is taking the lead and taking a lot of feedback, not only through that, we're assessing the recent scores that we came up with and why certain scores are being challenged and not challenged. So those are discussion with the permitting program enforcement. So we're collecting a lot of information. We're hoping to come up with pre-rulemaking discussions with everybody, that's all the stakeholders, to see what kind of changes we want to bring into the VSP and follow through with that rulemaking.
Thank you. I have another question in the queue, and this is from Andrea. So how are we speeding up the permitting process while still ensuring that we're adequately determining whether a permit is appropriate and what requirements should be attached to them?
I apologize. Could you repeat that question? I was lost.
So how are we speeding up the permit process while still ensuring that we're adequately determining whether a permit is appropriate and what requirements should be attached to them?
That's a great question. So definitely, again, as I discussed, permitting program put in a lot of process improvements. And this is, I want to give you one example of that is when we review applications, these are, we have we did a project, the Lean Six Sigma project, how to review the technical review of the applications. We reduced the time from, I don't recall it anymore, the number of days it takes us to process, to find the application technically complete down to 13 months. And to accomplish that, we had to work with our staff and our legal staff when we write what's called the notice of deficiencies. These notice of deficiencies are very robust and thorough. Historically, we had given many these NODs where it dragged down for a long time. Nowadays, our NODs are very robust and specifically states what's the problem with the application, what corrections needs to be made, and how those corrections need to be made. So the facility not only knows what the problems areas are in the application, how to fix it, and what would be an acceptable application to the program. So we reduced the number of NODs issued from substantial numbers. I believe now we're down to a little over two NODs per permit application review. So that's a reduction because of the robustness of our NODs, notice of deficiencies. Just for the layman, notice of deficiency stands for comments on the application. These applications are volumes and volumes long, so it isn't just a paper exercise. We use a checklist that's over 1,000 lines, items that requires a facility to provide detailed information to the department.
Okay. We have another question specifically is what are DTSC's plans or performance standards to address the long overdue permit decisions such as for FiberTech and Clean Harbors, Bundawillow?
Yes, thank you for the question. I know Wayne Lorenzen is online, and Wayne and I talked about how best to answer this question. I was looking forward to those questions, and I'm going to let Wayne chime in and answer some of this question for us.
Sure, thanks, Rizgar. So thanks for the question. So specifically for FiberTech and for Buttonwillow, FiberTech, we do have a plan to public notice a permit decision this year. That will get rid of our oldest permit that's been expired for the longest period of time. So that is planned for this year. With Buttonwillow, we are working with Kern County in their EIR process because the Buttonwillow landfill is also proposing an expansion with the county. And we're working closely with them in the development of an EIR so that at the end of the process, we can evaluate that EIR and determine if it's appropriate to use for a permit decision for DTSC. That would most likely happen next fiscal year.
And given that we are at 5 o'clock and definitely want to respect individuals' times, given that we already spent 2 hours presenting on hazardous waste management program, but I really want to allow both Francesca and Rizgar to see if there's any last minute thoughts, and any of the other questions that we weren't able to answer, we'll definitely follow up with a response. But Rizgar, Francesca?
Thank you, Deanna. Again, I appreciate your feedback. This is a workload analysis is a comprehensive in one way, and it really doesn't address all the challenges that the department faces or the hazardous waste management program. This is an initial kick of the tires, and we looked at what just to bring the service levels at the level that we are able to protect Californians. Again, I'm open to the discussion. Definitely Meredith, the director, and Francesca are open to listening to you and what changes we can bring into the programs. And again, we are looking for the success of the department and protecting our the department and ensuring that our communities are protected. So I'm open to dialogue how we could provide better services to our Californians. Thank you.
And I'll just echo my appreciation and gratitude for everyone hanging in there for two hours. This was a lot of information and very data, intense presentations. Thank you, Rizgar, for all the information. Absolutely appreciate the questions. Many of you have ideas about, levels of service and how pollution prevention and the hazardous waste management program could be reinvented and modernized, and appreciated all of the feedback on taking what we've done, which is across all programs in the hazardous waste management program, implementing Lean Six Sigma projects and coming up with tracking mechanisms and data management and data governance processes to better manage metrics that enable us to be more transparent and accountable. And so I appreciate questions in those arenas, as well as we continue to try and improve our tracking and accountability processes. So thank you so much for your participation. We're really very much looking forward to continued conversations with you all about DTSC levels of service and fee and governance reform. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, thank you. And we're going to be uploading these presentations onto the website where we share the slide deck. So please look out for that. Thank you and have a good evening.